Sue Hutchings, and it's my pleasure, in fact, it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce Dr. Fisher to you this evening. This isn't in the notes, of course, but I'm here to tell you I've known him since the 70s. We don't look that old, do we? And he is, without a doubt, one of the nicest people on this campus. So it was a pleasure when I found out I was going to be able to tell you about him this evening. Dr. Frank Fisher is a professor in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department at Rice University. He received his bachelor's degree from Hanover College and his master's degree and PhD from Purdue. He came to Rice in 1961 as a postdoctoral research fellow and joined the faculty in 1963. Dr. Fisher's research interests include wetland estuarying. You told me how to pronounce it.
Close enough.
Estuarying, ecosystems, comparative physiology, and biogeochemistry, specifically trace atmospheric gases. He has served as chairman of the Animal Resources Branch of the National Institutes of Health Study Panel. He's has been vice president of the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council of the National Marine Fisheries Service and chairman of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee of the Galveston Bay National Estuary Program. He has also chaired the board of directors of the Gulf Coast Waste Disposal Authority and served as advisory trustee of the Galveston Bay Foundation. A busy, busy man. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Frank Fisher. Welcome.
After hearing that, I'm wondering, am I in the right place? Welcome, and I appreciate you coming, and I enjoy being here. A level and stupid sight. Changing ecology of rice. You know, I've looked over the titles of the foregoing talks. Now, I looked at the next two that come after this, and after reading my title, I think Barry loaded me. How can we get a topic out of a level and stupid site, a flat floodplain prone to prairie on the Texas coast, according to John Bowles? I've got to build a university out of this scenario somehow. Let's see how we can do that. In my career, I've had three examples that I believe in. Sir Isaac Newton, philosopher, physicist, mathematician, said, give me something I can measure and I'll tell you about it. The second person would be Louis Agassiz, professor of biology at Harvard, founder of the Marine Biological Laboratory at Woods Hole, where we spent 15 summers or so. He said, study nature, not books. And the third great person is it's Yogi Berra. And Yogi had a lot of profound isms that he made, but he said, make a few observations and you might see something. Of course, he also said, if you come to a fork in the road, take it, and a few other things. But let's think about those three things as we talk about the topic tonight. How are we going to get a university out of this ecosystem that we have here, this physical ecosystem? Let's make some observations. I'll lead you. I want you to help. I want you to interrupt, ask questions at any time. I enjoy folks, discussion, interruptions, and I enjoy learning. So let's have at it. Well, where is rice? We've already said that it's on a flat, wet prairie, in the words that's been delivered to us. And we know that if we proceed to the east, we run into the Gulf of Mexico. We have a certain expanse of coastal wetlands, marshes, and we immediately then proceed into the coastal prairies, slightly evolved. Does anyone know what the elevation in the Rice campus is? 50 feet. 50 feet. We're not much above sea level. And how far is it to Galveston? 50 miles, roughly. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what the slope is. It's flat. So the description that we gave is correct. The sediments that we're standing on the Rice campus were derived from alluvial fans that spread over marine sediments. They're deep, heavy clays. The nearest bedrock is something like 25 kilometers that direction. They are impervious, and that's why we have wet prairies, and as we affectionately know it as William Rice's Marsh here on the campus. Well, let's take another look at the campus and start out at Greenbrier and proceed toward Main Street. You immediately recognize in this mental image that you have that there's quite a stand of trees on the eastern aspect of the campus. As you proceed further west, there are no trees. It becomes a true prairie. The soils on the east type, the vegetation reflects what the soils are under them. They are sandier, they're more friable, they're slightly higher, more well-drained, more well-aerated. Tree roots can penetrate deeper than the grasses do on the west, where the only very, very shallow roots in a wet environment there. So we got a dry, wet, and where would we find Harris Gully? If it were present, we could see it. It's just to the east of the stadium, coursing down across the campus, down toward the track stadium, under Main Street, through the medical center, and intersects Brays Bayou in this direction. So dry, wet. Predominant trees that you see in this area are what? Pines, for the most part. Loblolly, slash. At one time it was said that this was a post oak savanna. A savanna being a grassland with interspersed trees on it. We have a very nice post oak left. That's how much we have left of it. It's over near Jones College. We also have another tree that has some recognition here, and it may be or may not be. John, correct me. There's a pecan tree just to the left as you proceed from Sallyport going toward Main Street, and I'm not sure it's old enough, certainly, to be the one that Blackjack Pershing planted there, I believe in the 20s, if I'm not mistaken about that. Yeah, it's the only pecan tree in that area, and it's certainly old enough to be. So we have a distinction there. And then we have this famous waterway that coursed the campus called Harris Gully. And talking to alums who have grayer hair than I do, or more at least, I've heard a lot of stories about Harris Gully. Duck hunting. As John points out in his book, Huxley first saw swimming grasshoppers and crawdaddy chimneys. It was an active body of water. Well, how active is it? Phil Bedient in the Environmental Science and Engineering Department has a system to monitor the flow out of that, out of what exists now of Harris Gully. 2 15-foot square culverts course under the campus and exit at Brays Bayou. It starts off. It drains. That gully drained, about 4.5 square miles of real estate. Some of it west of Greenbrier, coursed over and northeasterly to about the intersection of Bolsover and Whitney. Then turned rapidly south and went southwest through the Rice parking lot to the east of the stadium past the old track stadium, just to the east of it, under Main Street, and over that. 15 feet square, 2 of them. How much rain do we have here a year? Roughly 48 inches. That's easy to work with, 4 feet. We had 4.5 square miles. How many acres are there in a square mile? 640. So 4.5 times 640 gives you the acres. Now put 4 feet of rain on that and say, we'll make this simple, say that we have, everything's going to run off. There will be no evaporation, no permeation. You've got an incredible amount of water that's coursing through that now. Anyone that's ever been here during one of the floods can go to the, just past Shepherd on Rice Boulevard, and on the south side of Shepherd, there are 2 giant openings to storm sewers. I've seen garbage cans, landscape timbers, and railroad ties that actually get into the system there. Now that was a scenic thing on campus at that time. Huxley noticed it. His lab assistant, Joe Davies, who came with him when he came to this campus, noticed it. And the alums, up until about the time that it was closed, which preceded, of course, the construction of the stadium, and I don't know exactly the date of when it was closed. But I can tell you there is an amenity that's coming, because there's going to be the Rice Arboretum on the lower end of that, just east of the Rice Stadium. Charles Tapley, a group of us in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department, are working on that, trying to restore a figment of it back to the natural scape. We're not going to have nearly the water that goes through it, but the campus drainage, the surface drainage, will go through it, and we'll have some ponded water and things like that. So this sort of gives you an idea of the layout where we're sitting. Now, yes.
Why did it turn abruptly and cause it walls over and went?
You have to look at the contour maps. By the way, let me tell you, the websites are difficult to get into on this, but getting into the maps of Houston, you can find one segment of this that's got a beautiful map with the contours. The 50-foot Harris Gully was 5 feet below 50 feet, 45 feet. And all that water coursed through at that time. It followed the contours, draining most of it west, and came around, followed the contours down to the confluence of, say, Main Street, and then through the medical center. Well, what happened on this campus in those early days when we had the Harris Gully? We probably had fewer buildings, obviously, a lot fewer. I'd give to you, submit to you to look at John's little booklet in the decade progression of Rice and the buildings. An excellent depiction of that. But largely this part was the campus, this campus. By the way, I cannot find, and John can probably help me, on exactly when Mr. Rice came into ownership of the property here. He was deeded a large amount, 300 and so acres of land downtown for business reasons. And his land acquisitions in Louisiana and other places, it says that he bought a farm, or came in ownership of a farm, near Bel Air of about 300 acres. Now, whether this was in the late 1800s, I rather think that it is, but the chronology and the documents that I've found on that are not clear exactly.
Bel Air Farm is not the Rice campus. He didn't actually own this plot of land. The trustees put this together as a series of purchases in that.
Okay. Okay, I was unaware of that. I had 2 300-acre plots. I know it's closer to West U than it is to Bel Air. Thank you, John. That's good. I'm a scientist, not a historian, as you can well tell. Well, what happened on this campus? I think largely it was a cow-calf ranching operation. The soils are too dense and heavy probably for cotton. this far east. Small grain probably didn't survive, so I rather surmise in what I've read that it was a calf cattle operation. And that brings up several interesting things. How did they operate this as a cattle ranch? We know that slaves were the cowboys, well documented, but there's a real problem with this as being a successful ranch, because there was a disease that was very, very common in the early days called fall down disease. I had to do quite a bit of research on this, mainly through A&M, and a former student of mine, B.C. Robinson, who was a veterinarian, and I figured if I want to know something about cow diseases, I'd check with him. This was a disease inflicted by the fact of the lack of magnesium in the soil, which then is transferred to the plants. Magnesium is, most people realize, it's heavily involved in, say, oxidative phosphorylation, energy metabolism, and if you have a deficiency of that in the food source, the cattle stagger, fall down. No relation to mad cow disease or something of that nature. From our own personal experience, my wife and myself, our neighbor across the street, our house sits on Roxton, and it's back about 20 feet from a normal setback. And it was set back because there were 2 large trees and there were cattle mangers under it. And I asked Si one time, I said, well, what do they have over there? He said, mainly mineral supplements. He said, the disease in the cattle at that time. Now this was up as late as probably the 30s, when that, Southampton was established, that they recognized it there. And it must have had some impact on the FC of running a cattle-calf operation. It was also well known that there were other diseases of cattle. There was a particular problem that they had with ergot, smut that grows on brown seed paspalum, has all sorts of nasty effects on cattle. And that was probably a problem. So I think it's probably the majority. Even further, you can find some, again, anecdotal information that there were no historic bison or deer much in this, which would be consistent with that also. Whether that's true, I say that's anecdotal, and I'm not sure. So grass tetany, fall down disease, but we did have cattle here. How do we know that cattle were here? I shuddered to think when I started on this, and Mary called me, that I've been here almost half the lifespan of Rice University, but as several people have pointed out, if we put all of the alums from Rice University in the stadium or compared it to A&M, there's more students on the A&M and Texas campus today than we have alumni. So it's been small, but we've been fortunate to have been here during that particular period of time.